Welcome to Catholic Focus. My name is Pedro, and today we'll be looking at one of the most famous objects in popular Christian piety. I had the opportunity of seeing the replica of the Holy Shroud of Turin while it was here in exhibit at Holy Eucharist Parish in Toronto, and I was deeply moved by what can be deduced from simply studying the shroud.
Holy Eucharist is a Ukrainian Catholic church, and in the Ukrainian tradition, icons are very important. The Shroud of Turin is somewhat of an icon.
In the Second Council of Nicaea, when there was a misunderstanding about the purpose of icons or the value of icons. In fact, there was even a movement at that time that wanted to see icons completely removed and destroyed. In fact, they were destroying icons. That Second Council of Nicaea reacclaimed the importance of the icon as being like a window that you view, and it touches our minds and hearts to the sacred. This is an icon.
And so I began my quest to find as much as I could about the Holy Shroud, and also about the man behind the shroud. For centuries, both believers and non-believers have questioned faith. For many, scientific proof is necessary, and so we go on in search of evidence as if finding it would prove the very existence of God. For some, the Shroud of Turin may very well be that proof.
A new era began for the Shroud of Turin on May 28, 1898, when amateur photographer Secondo Pia made the first photograph of the shroud. The negative of the photograph clearly showed what many already believed through popular piety for centuries. There is an outline of a man embedded onto the cloth.
We may never know who this man was, but thanks to science, we are able to determine many facts about the cause of his death. For many, these facts point to the indisputable certainty that the man who was wrapped in the Shroud of Turin was in fact the man who many call the Christ.
The Shroud of Turin is a burial cloth measuring approximately 14 feet in length and 3 feet in width. On its frontal and dorsal sides, there is the image of a man. Careful examination reveals that this man was beaten everywhere except on the soles of the feet and the pubis, and it can be speculated that he suffered an extremely torturous death by crucifixion.
When someone is crucified, there are a couple of possibilities as what the final mechanism leading to death might be. Death might occur because of hypovolemia, which means a loss of blood volume, and that could occur because of a loss of blood through wounds, or possibly from dehydration when the water content of the body is lost and the blood volume goes down and there isn't enough blood circulating through the heart. And the other possibility might be is that there might become difficulties in breathing because of the position of the arms. The breathing might be done just by the movement of the diaphragm, which over a period of time becomes very inefficient. And once lack of oxygen occurs, all of the cells stop working and a person can die from asphyxia, which means a lack of oxygen supply to the tissues.
In 1978, the shroud was subjected to a series of non-destructive tests using some of the most highly sophisticated equipment available. These experiments rendered startling results. The man of the shroud was about 5 feet 10 inches, and his build allows his weight to be evaluated at about 176 pounds. It is difficult to determine the ethnicity of the man based on his features. The cloth itself is made from flax fibers that are woven in a 3-to-1 herringbone twill. This weave was common in the ancient Middle East and not found in Europe when the shroud was first displayed there in the 14th century. Traces of human blood were found on the shroud. Those who studied the shroud claim that this blood was already coagulating on the skin and claims are made that because of this, the blood belonged to a human body at the time of death. Other experts claim that this is impossible to determine. The studies also show that the blood is very dense. This is a common result of dehydration. The amount of bilirubin found in the blood has led some to speculate that the man of the shroud had been beaten in the hours preceding his death. However, high bilirubin levels also could indicate other conditions such as liver disease or liver failure. On the right side, between the fourth and fifth ribs, there is an oval-shaped wound which is 4 centimeters long. Blood samples taken from the cloth were found to be type AB. These samples also help determine the DNA of the man of the shroud. This information is detailed in Dr. Gasa Valdez's book, The DNA of God. The book explains that the blood samples are so old and degraded that very few DNA segments were found, eliminating any possibility of cloning anything from the blood found on the cloth. Other DNA experts argue, however, that so much contamination exists on the shroud that no DNA test, no matter how carefully done, could ever be considered definitive. These blood samples match the samples found in the Sudarium of Oviedo, the sweat cloth that, according to tradition and scientific studies, was used to cover and clean the face of Jesus after the crucifixion, and that is preserved in the Cathedral of Oviedo in Spain.
Now, there is no image on the Sudarium of Oviedo, only stains are visible. Now, from the composition of the main stains, it is evident that the man whose face the Sudarium covered died in an upright position. The stains consist of 1 part blood and 6 parts fluid from a pleural edema.
Pleural fluid, pleural means, refers to the lining that's around the lungs and around the chest cavity. So pleural fluid would be accumulation of fluid in that area. And it can occur when the heart is not pumping properly and there's a backup of pressure in the chest. And that pressure causes fluid to extrude from the lungs and the tissues. So there would be a buildup of fluid in the chest cavity. After death, it's not uncommon for fluids to come out through the nose and the mouth, and that can be from stomach contents or it can be from fluid that's actually accumulating in the lung tissue. So that's not an uncommon thing that we see in persons who have died some time ago. It's called body purging, and it's fluid either from the stomach contents or from the lung tissue.
Jewish tradition demands that if the face of a dead person was in any way disfigured, it should be covered with a cloth to avoid people seeing this unpleasant sight. This would certainly have been the case with Jesus, whose face was covered in blood from the injuries produced by the crown of thorns and swollen from falling and being struck. The many tests done on the Sudarium of Oviedo have led experts to conclude that the Oviedo Sudarium covered the same face as the Turin shroud. On the chest, back, and legs, there are more than 100 round markings, less than an inch large, which could have been caused by the tearing of the skin and by bleeding under the skin. These wounds occur in groups of 2 and 3 and match wounds inflicted by flogging with a Roman flagrum, which was a wooden stick with many strings tipped with barbell-shaped balls of lead or bone.
The pathology of the image on the shroud also shows that the man of the shroud was beaten by 2 people, one on the right and one on the left. We can also deduce that the one on the right was the taller one. He was also more vicious. It can also be deduced that this person on the right, unless he was beating with a backhanded blow, was left-handed.
Below both shoulder blades and above the right shoulder blade, there are large rectangular bruises attributed to the weight of a heavy and tough object, which might have been the horizontal beam of the cross that sometimes the convicted prisoners had to carry to the place of execution. On the frontal image of the shroud, the imprints left by the upper limbs are distinguished. The arms lie slightly bent from the elbow. The left hand lies over the right hand. On the right wrist, a bloodstain can be seen. Bloodstains running along both upper arms can be seen, likely caused by two blood flows running upwards from the same square-shaped wound on each wrist. This is explained by the two different positions assumed by men during crucifixion, supporting the weight on legs and feet and hanging from the wrists. Only 4 fingers of the hands are visible. According to Dr. Pierre Barbet, in his book A Doctor at Calvary, the thumb is hidden in the palm by a contraction reflex caused by a lesion to the median nerve in the wrist. Even though popular art never shows the nail to have gone through the wrist, it is believed that in crucifixion, nails were driven into this area since the structure of the hand could not support the full weight of the body. A crucified skeleton found near Jerusalem, which dates back to the 1st century AD, has been used to confirm this theory. Traces of soil mixed with blood were found on the knees and feet imprints. Soil samples were taken off the imprint of the right foot and matched to samples of limestone found in the Middle East. The imprint of the left leg looks shorter than the right one. A possible explanation is that the left knee may have been fixed by rigor mortis in a position that is more bent than that of the right knee.
Rigor mortis means a stiffening of the body that occurs after death. Shortly after death, the muscles become very soft, and then they almost become fixed in the position that they were in when death occurred. And that is because the chemistry that causes the muscles to relax and to constrict changes, and they get fixed in the position that they were in at the time death occurred. And it starts anywhere between 0 and 12 hours after death. It can last approximately 12 hours, and it can take approximately 12 hours to totally relax, but all of this is variable on the state of the person at the time of death. Temperature, and total environmental conditions can all change the rate of rigor and how long it lasts.
The feet are clearly visible in the posterior imprint, while on the anterior one, there is an evident bloodstain that does not allow us to distinguish the outline of the foot. The right sole is clearly imprinted, while only the heel area of the left sole is visible. This suggests that the crucifixion took place using just one nail, driven through both feet, that were laid one upon the other. On the right sole, we can note the hole made by the nail that pierced the feet.
Many people have been moved by the imprint on the shroud.
The reaction that I get from people that I've talked to feel something very special in this exhibit, and I think people's faith and just the fact that, people come and they're looking here and, the books that are here, it seems like they want to drink more from this fountain of knowledge that comes from our Lord's Passion.
Seeing the display, I became more and more convinced that the man from the shroud may very well have been Jesus Christ. The evidence is overwhelming. Some of the most striking details come from the imprint of the face.
It is clear that the man from the shroud was beaten before his death. Some swelling is visible on the face, especially on the right cheek. There are signs of lacerations and bruising, especially above the right eye. The nasal bridge is also deviated, possibly by a fracture. There are over 30 small puncture wounds on the scalp and numerous blood flows on the forehead, the nape of the neck, and along the hairline. These wounds go radially around the head and they reach the top of the occipital bone.
These wounds were made by something looking more like a cap of thorns rather than a crown of thorns, because the wounds are all over the head.
A recent study found very slight images resembling something that is covering the man's eyes. Jesuit priest Father Francis Files and classical coin expert Michael Marks believe that these are imprints of coins. They claim that these images show sequences of letters that match existing coins minted by Pontius Pilate under the authority of Tiberius Caesar in Jerusalem in 30 and 31 AD.
There are, however, conflicting claims regarding the Jewish tradition of putting coins over the eyes of the dead, and disagreement as to whether something as small and specific as the dates on a coin could have been imprinted on a cloth as thick and coarse as the Shroud of Turin.
In 1973, and again in 1978, Swiss criminologist Dr. Max Frey took particle samples from the shroud. Frey identified 58 different pollens, many which established that the cloth had been in the Jerusalem area as well as parts of the Middle East, which include Constantinople and Edessa. 50% of the grains of pollen found belong to the Gundelia tourneforte flower. This plant is a thorn that exists only in Israel, the Sinai Peninsula, and Jordan. Israeli botanist Dr. Avi Danin has confirmed that these pollens are not transferred from plant to plant by the wind, but rather by bees. He concludes that the only explanation for the large quantity of pollen found on the shroud is that the shroud originated in Israel and that the pollens got there after direct contact with the cloth. What's more, in the forehead area, there are allegedly imprints of this flower on the cloth. The Gundelia flower blooms around March and April, and it takes a full day to bloom. The imprints show a flower that would have been picked around 4 in the afternoon, and its state of decomposition shows that it was picked about 30 hours before the imprint was made.
Because the Gundelia flower is a thorn, and the imprint is found near the forehead, many people believe that this in fact was the plant that was used to fashion the crown of thorns. Perhaps the most controversial study about the shroud surrounds the carbon-14 testing to determine its age.
In 1988, a small sample of the shroud's linen fabric was tested using carbon-14 dating methods. The conclusions of the test suggest that the linen was produced between 1260 and 1390 AD. However, in 1994, further experiments suggested that the fire of 1532 could have altered the carbon-14 testing results. The scientific community itself now questions both these results, and more recent experimental studies have reopened the debate. 16 triangular shapes can be seen on the shroud. These are patches that were used to repair damage caused to the shroud during the fire when the shroud was preserved at the Sainte-Chapelle of Chambéry in France. These patches are very visible because their fabric is different from the fabric of the shroud. During this fire, the shroud was also damaged by water. In fact, the 7 rhomboidal areas that we can still see on the shroud are the few parts that remained dry. These imprints, as well as the burn damage, can be seen repeated along the sheet because of the folding pattern. After the fire, the Poor Clare sisters at the monastery stitched the shroud on a piece of Holland cloth.
If this is the burial cloth of Jesus, how did it end up in Turin? There are records from the crusade to Constantinople in the year 1204 indicating that there was in that city a picture of Jesus on a piece of cloth. It had been moved there from the city of Edessa in 944, where it was discovered in the city walls in the year 544. Historians think that the Edessa cloth is what we now call the Shroud of Turin.
It is believed that the Crusaders brought the shroud from Constantinople to France. It is known that in the 1350s, the shroud was in Lirey, France. In 1453, it was given to Duke Louis of Savoy and was taken with the ruling family when the capital of Savoy was transferred to Chambéry, where it was housed in a beautiful chapel where the fire took place in 1532. The shroud arrived in Turin in 1578, and since then it has been kept in the Turin Cathedral. Umberto II left the shroud to the Pope in his will, and in 1983 it became property of the Holy See.
The latest and most dramatic discoveries concern a piece of writing on the shroud itself.
For years, people have been asking why, below and to the sides of the imprint of the chin, there are 3 clear and regular lines where no imprint is present. A very complicated photographic and computer optical test revealed what appears to be letters in Latin and in Greek. Under the chin, we find written Jesus and on one side, Nazarene. An explanation is that according to the law, the centurion charged with ensuring the execution of the condemned would have drawn on the cloth strips with some sort of cement or adhesive on which he would write the name of the deceased with red liquid. Where these strips were drawn, the imprint was not formed on the cloth, causing the lines with no imprint.
Many have believed that the imprint on the cloth is man-made. Some believe that Leonardo da Vinci painted it. But how could he have embedded the image on the cloth, since there is no trace of paint or any other liquid applied to the fibers? How could he have known about the wound on the wrist? How did he know about negative photography? It is now an accepted view that the image on the shroud is not created by any man.
The question still remains, what caused the image? In the image areas, the translucent fibers are a slightly deeper tinge of yellow, as if the fibers in the image area are more degraded or aged than in the non-image areas. There is a hypothesis that the Shroud of Turin's image is a result of a very natural, complex chemical reaction resulting from the combination of ammonia derivatives emerging from a body and saccharides within a carbohydrate residue that covers the fibers of the shroud. Another more popular theory states that the image was transferred onto the cloth by some type of process where matter simply turned into energy, some type of particulate and parallel radiation. Scientists can determine that this radiation was focused by gravity because the image did not transfer itself onto the sides of the shroud. This is a process that has never been seen before.
The Church does not officially say whether or not the man of the shroud was Jesus. But for those of us who believe in Christ, Pope John Paul II said this during his visit to Turin in May 1998. The shroud is a truly unique sign that points to Jesus, the true Word of the Father, and invites us to pattern our lives on the life of the one who gave himself for us. We can only conclude with any certainty that the shroud image is that of a corpse of a man who was beaten and crucified. We also know that the body was taken out of the cloth without the cloth being unfolded. The answer to the question of how the image was produced or what produced the image remains now, as it has been in the past, a mystery. If you have any thoughts about what you've heard tonight or any stories about the shroud, we'd love to hear from you. Send us a good old-fashioned letter to Catholic Focus, Salt and Light Television, 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C1P1, or you can also write us an email to focus@saltandlighttv.org. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time on Catholic Focus.